welcome to There's a Workshop for That. Today's episode kicks off a special two-part series with someone whose story honestly deserves a whole podcast on its own. Mohsin Memon is my guest. He was born in India, started acting in major Bollywood productions as a child, moved to the US, returned to India, and somewhere along the way became completely obsessed with games, human behavior, and how our beautiful brains work. That was the beginning of a powerful mission, and honestly, even with 2 episodes, we'll just be scratching the surface. I had the pleasure of meeting and collaborating with Mohsin thanks to Jenny Martin, who connected us and invited me to co-facilitate a session after his talk at the Inclusive Facilitation Exchange in London. And how do I describe it? Let's just say it was a magical collaborative match. I can see him smiling, so I'll take that as a yes. Mohsin, your work bridges neuroscience-based learning and behavior change, and you have designed over 50 games. One of them is Evive, a leadership simulation we'll dive into in the second episode of this series. But in this first episode, we're exploring the AFERR Model, a neuroscience-grounded framework that actually emerged from the Evive game and that can now stand on its own as a powerful tool to design learning and workshops experience that truly stick. So if you're a facilitator, trainer, or learning designer who's ever wondered how to create experiences that lead to real transformation, stay with us. Hi, Mohsin. How are you doing?
I'm doing so well. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. You are in India right now, right?
I am. And we're just entering the summer season, so gearing up for the heat.
So we have seen as last time in London 2 weeks ago. It was a great, great time. And I'm so glad that you're here today. And I know you, of course, a little bit, but I would love to hear a bit more about your story, even if I revealed a few pieces in the introduction. I hope that was okay. But if you want to introduce you with your own words, I would be more than happy.
Sure, I would love to. As I was going through the phases of life, you don't always realize all of what you're going through adds up and becomes something later on. And but now, as I look back, I'm able to clearly see that there were three very distinct periods that I went through. And the first was, like you said, the acting career, which just brought so much of the light and the understanding of storytelling and the world building and narrative that it would be front and center for me, growing up. And then the second part of my career, where I was really under a mentorship program with leaders like Robert Kiyosaki and many others that understand what it's like to build a business that's win-win, centered around how do you create businesses and entrepreneurial programs that inspire and generate more of what you want to see in the world. And then the third part of my career has been in the learning industry, which has been more valuable for me personally than it has been for any of the clients that I've worked with. And we've made some real impact with the clients that we've worked with. But really the impact that you experience as an individual when you adopt some of the things that you learn, and when we talk about in facilitation, that's really the real reward, I think.
Nice. This is I tell in the intro, this is like we could make a whole podcast about all this journey. But today we will start to talk about something that you presented during the Inclusive Facilitation Exchange. And this is the AFERR model. And when I went the first time to the website on the AFERR model, here is written, unlock your brain's potential with the AFERR model. So that's a big promise. And I know you can back it up. So can you tell us more? What is the AFERR model and where did it come from?
Yeah, AFERR Model has been a discovery, and my greatest realization with the AFERR Model is that it's always been there, and it exists in nature, much like gravity, and it's there, and you see it playing out in life, in things, in the world around us. And as we started looking at these 20,000 games and started analyzing them, a certain pattern started to emerge, And then I was coming in touch with the understanding that why am I able to see this pattern? And I think that had to do with the earlier career that I had in film and in this mentorship, understanding both sides of the equation and seeing the big picture, being able to zoom out quickly to be able to see what's really going on. And then the applied behavioral sciences really sort of brought in that understanding of what's actually happening at a process level. So in essence, AFERR model has these 5 aspects, and it breaks down how the human brain processes learning, processes information, and translates that into the sense that it makes of its reality. And the more we understand it, the more we see it play out everywhere.
And so I had the pleasure to see this AFERR model and to co-facilitate or facilitate a session after you presented this. But would you navigate us through the different stage of the AFERR model?
Yeah, I would love to. So I like to put the AFERR model literally like right on the tips of my finger. And so think of the 5 elements of the AFERR model are activation, forecasting, experimentation, realization, and reflection. And we're all going through these processes, and some of them have these inner loops, which is what we're discovering now, that when you get activated and you move into forecasting, that can cause a certain kind of a loop where it reactivates you. But what are these? What do they actually mean? So activation is the starting point of all of any kind of thinking that you will do. Anything and everything starts with the activation. And the way activation manifests in the human experience is through emotions. So we experience an emotion, and that tends to activate us. So if we get excited, it activates us in a certain direction. If we feel boredom, it activates us in a different direction. Now, once you've been activated, the brain naturally moves to the next stage, which is forecasting. And now your brain, based on what it's been activated on, is starting to forecast the future. It's starting to think about, where are we going? What can this look like? And an example of this is, for example, if you're looking to find something to watch on Netflix, you're often looking for something that is familiar enough yet different enough. So fitting that right sweet spot of what you're looking for and what you're coming across, you're going through this process of consideration where you are determining whether watching this show is going to be worth my while. Is it going to give me the satisfaction that I'm hoping to have, by the end of even by the end of the first episode. In fact, for some of us, it's like 10 minutes, right? Like if it's not engaging me in 10 minutes, so activation plays such a significant role in the rest of what everything happens, because it is the starting point. And I was so amazed and surprised when I started looking at the learning ecosystems that activation was barely ever considered. We often measure all of the students or all of the cohort against the same parameters, while they could have different degrees of activation that they could have been excited about. And that determines everything else that happens. And you'll see when we map this out. So you've got activation, which is the emotion, and then you move that activation causes you to move into forecasting, which is the thinking. So forecasting manifests itself in the form of thinking in the human experience. And that thinking causes you to think, forecast the future, and think about what are you going to do? How whatever you've been activated about is going to look like. It's kind of like a mental image that your brain constructs using the knowledge and understanding that it already has, that it already knows. And this is a big thing. When we go to a new place, we often have this mental image of what that place will look like if we've never been there. But the moment we show up there, that old image gets wiped clean with a new one, which is rooted in your reality. You know what I mean? Like, so your mind will have already created a mental image before you ever get to that, before you ever have that experience. And I mean, this gets really deep because there are many parameters that measure and assess to the degree of forecast, the optimism and the cautionary nature of your forecast also plays a big role in terms of what your natural default mechanisms of forecasting are like, you know? And so once your brain has done enough forecasting, it moves into the next stage, which is experimentation. And what's interesting about this experimentation is that for most of us, we won't move into that until there's enough forecasting. And that enough forecasting is different for different people. For example, for Nathy, it could be like I could think of an idea and like forecast, that's enough forecasting. Let's get down to it and let's try it and see what happens, right? And for someone else, it could be a very different nature of forecasting where they've got to have everything in order. All of my ducks have to be in the row before I can even move, right? And when you have that sufficiently, you move into experimentation, where you are now attempting to do the thing that you had forecasted and to see, hopefully, arrive at the difference between your prediction and your reality. So the experimentation is this environment wherein you're just trying it out. And we're doing this every day. For example, we might get thirsty, right? Like, and then that causes us to think about water. We get up, go get the water. That's the experiment. Drink the water. Do you feel better? You know what I mean? So it's the AFERR model is playing out just as we live our lives, because ultimately what the experience wants is a certain realization. And that's what we're really, really after fundamentally. We're after arriving at that realization, which we hope we wanted to begin with. And that's where we are assessing whether the experiment was a success or a learning opportunity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or I wouldn't call it a failure. Of course, it's your perspective and how you process it. And then the last R, so there are two R's, AFER, which is realization. In realization, you are comparing you're adjusting your prediction errors basically, and you're saying comparing the choices that you took and the consequence of the choices, and you're now fitting in the new mental model, what you've just now experienced and gathered, into consolidating it. Now, sometimes some life experiences are too starkly different from our expectations, and they don't just consolidate just through realization. They need a deeper kind of integration. And that's where the second R comes in, which is that's when we need to pause and we need to reflect and we need to integrate, what does this really mean to me? You know, like grief is a really difficult one. When you lose someone or something significant happens in your life, processing that it takes a lot. And so it requires the time, the space, and the safety to be able to go inward and find what emerges. And you know what's interesting is that most people skip the reflection part of it, because often they take at face value the realization that comes to them, and then they use that to reactivate. Now, if you've had the wrong realization, the funny and interesting thing about the brain is that it needs a realization, and it can choose to fit the wrong realization into the understanding, right? And if that happens, that could cause you to reactivate in the wrong direction. And now you're forecasting the wrong things, experimenting the wrong things. And that's how we can often get stuck in these kind of bad sort of equilibriums, as John Nash would call it. So that's a quick summary of the AFERR model, the 5 stages.
I know that you have a beautiful picture that you used during the inclusive facilitation exchange. Would you show us this picture? Because I need visualization when you explain something.
I will show you. Yeah, so this gives you an idea of the flow
Mhm.
of how we are moving through these processes and moving through activation into forecasting. With sufficient forecasting, we move into experimentation. From there, we move into realization, which is the outcome we wanted to gain from that experiment, comparing that result with the forecast that we did, and then arriving at certain understandings. And the way that experimentation looks like in the human experience is doing. And the way that realization looks like in the human experience is sensing or sense making. And the way that reflection looks like in the human experience is as integrating. So if you view AFERR from the human experience language, you would see that you're feeling, thinking, doing, sensing, and integrating. And that's what you're actually doing. And the more you integrate, and that's the power of reflection, the more you integrate, the healthier your AFERR cycles and the faster your AFERR cycles will be. And these are cycles that are playing out in like microseconds, in like nanoseconds, because we're realizing things all the time. And there are also macro AFERR cycles, which will go on for like a couple of weeks or months or years, where you have a certain realization like years later, you're like, oh my God, it makes so much sense now. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely. I know absolutely what you mean. Thank you for sharing the picture. So what I found so interesting about this model is that first it helps you when you are aware about the model. It helps you to go through some period of time you have in your life on an individual level. And second, you can use this AFERR model to design sessions, for example, because you know how you have to activate people and until the end of the process. But first, I would like to, if I may, I would like to tell the little story on how I got personally in touch with this AFERR model. Because it was 2 months ago, 3 months ago, we had our first connection because we had to prepare this session for the Inclusive Facilitation Exchange in London. So we had a call. It was the first call. We never spoke to each other before, even if we knew each other from LinkedIn a little bit. And we had like a small talk, and it was exactly in a period where I was actually emptying my house in Bali to come back to Europe. And I can remember that I told you, yes, I'm right now in Bali since 2 years. I'm coming back to Europe, not sure if this is the right choice, and I'm overthinking it and everything. And then we moved into the design of our workshop. So it was a very small talk. And I think one day later, you sent me a message, a very cute message where you told me, Nathy, was just thinking about your moving to Europe and use the AFERR model, like something activate your decision to come back to Europe. So you were forecasting something, and now before overthinking anything, just leave the experience, do the experience, because after this experience, you will have realization, and you will then reflect on what you take from this realization and what are your next steps. So it was for me the wow moment, this message, Mohsin Memon. It was really something that clicked in my mind and was so nice, because then I had a personal, a personal sense on how to apply this to my own life, because I tend to think or to make like the realization before even something happened. So it allows me to slow down and to go through the different steps. So thank you for that.
thank you for narrating that. And it's a personal story, and I'm so glad you did, because I'm sure a lot of people are able to relate to this. Also because just the nature of how the human brain works, right? There are some things that we just have to wait for. And until you wait, this activation forecasting loop can really spin you out. Because if you just stay in that, but when you remind yourself that, wait, the next installment of this journey is in experimentation, which will only happen when I get there. It just switches something in your mind, and it
Absolutely.
causes you to say, all right, I can actually, I've done my part, and now I need to wait for the experiment. So once I go through that experiment, I will then assess the realization. And what often happens is sometimes that activation forecasting loop really brings out something, whatever that is on the inside, and causes us to mess up the experimentation in some
Absolutely.
cases.
And I mean, what an experimentation. In 1 week after I arrived, I was in London. We had a absolutely amazing time with IFE and with the Evive certification, and it changed everything. We will talk about it later. But now, considering that our listeners are workshop facilitators, for most of them are learning designer, the beauty also of this model is that you can use it as a framework to design your session, right? So, and to have the possibility to have the different stage of the state of minds of your participants. So you are designing, okay, how can I design my session or open my session so that I can activate participant, or even how can I activate my participants before they come in the workshop day? And what do I would like them to forecasting? And then design the experience itself, the workshop,
Yeah.
and navigate them through realization and reflection, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like a map, that
Exactly.
a facilitator is able to work with when looking at the AFERR, and they're able to look at not only how they want to design the program. So it's a tool that can be used as a design framework for facilitators to set up, all right, what are my activation parameters? And each of the elements of AFERR have certain parameters that you're looking to fulfill, that we've been able to, through these 20,000 games that we've facilitated with Evive over the last 10 years, we've identified a number of things that really work to enable activation, things that really work to enable forecasting, things that really work to enable experimentation. What is a safe environment for experimentation? Because that's what you want. And we've seen there are certain parameters that we look at for bringing that out. So facilitators are able to pick up on that. That's the first thing. The other part of it is that facilitators are also able to use AFERR during the experience, during facilitation as well, because it gets you in touch with what is the state of mind in which your participant is in right now. Are they getting hyperactivated? Are they forecasting sufficiently? You get to come in touch with the nature of their forecasting. How shallow or deep their forecasting is, how optimistic or cautionary their forecasting is. And then you get to also see when they're experimenting, do they feel psychologically safe to step in and to do things? Do they have the freedom to choose whatever choice they want as they're experimenting? So it's all of those. So it becomes a tool during, before, during, and even after, because you're able to then have coaching conversations, like what caused you to feel activated, and what did the nature of your activation cause you to think, and what did you do, right? Like making the connection to helping learners, participants come in touch with their own internal process is such a rewarding experience. I think it continues to blow me away.
And I think we will work on it because I really think we need to deploy this AFERR model with the way to design experience sessions. You and we will collaborate on bringing the AFERR model to the facilitators, maybe with master classes upcoming. We are just discussing about that, but I think it gave me, and it could give facilitators a deeper way of designing, because this is not just a framework. It's really based on neuroscience and how our brains are working, right? Thank you so much. We will come in the next episode to talk about the tool that you can use to going through these stages from the AFERR model with your customer, whether you are a trainer or a workshop facilitator. And this is Evive. This is something huge. I've been in the certification program in London 10 days ago. And since it would be too long to have everything in one podcast, we are coming in the next podcast. Thank you so much, Mohsin.
Thank you so much. I was so happy to talk about the AFERR model, and I just loved the questions you had. It just brought out what we wanted, for the AFERR model. So I'm so glad that we had this chat.
Thank you.